Evening, everyone, and welcome to our SEAC meeting of Thursday, June 17th, 2021. I would like to start by acknowledging that the Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississauga of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. I would also like to state that the Durham District School Board is committed to learning environments that are safe, welcoming, respectful, equitable, accessible, inclusive, and free from discrimination while placing human rights and equity at the center. We'll begin with our roll call, starting with Autism Ontario.
Sensa Reneb for Autism Ontario.
Okay, Durham Down Syndrome Association.
Tara Cully, Durham Down Syndrome Association.
Ontario Association for Families of Children with Communication Disorders.
Elizabeth Daniel, OAFCCD.
Okay, Learning Disability Association of Durham Region.
Rowan Jarvis, present.
Voice for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Children. Okay, I don't see Kathy on. Association for Bright Children is myself, Eva Kyriakides, and SEAC Chair. Easter Seals Ontario. I don't see Hannah on. We have regrets from both our members at large, Craig Cameron and Carolyn McLennan. Moving on to our trustees.
Trustee Donna Edwards from the town of Ajax.
I saw Darlene. Did we lose Darlene? Oh, she's muted. Okay. Darlene Forbes, one of our trustees from Oshawa. Yeah, okay. Is also here. And moving on then to our staff, the Superintendent of Inclusive Student Services.
Good evening, Andrea McCauley.
Okay. Special Education Officer.
Good evening, Michelle Crawford-Eid.
Great. And I would like to welcome Caitlin Twitchen, who is also here for a curriculum facilitator. Oh, and sorry, our DSAA representatives.
Hi, good afternoon or good evening. It's Michelle Monk, DSAA rep, Eastdale principal.
And Russ Davidson, DSAA rep, Ajax vice principal.
Great, and our elementary school reps.
Good evening, David Robson, DSA, Dr. S.J. Phillips principal.
Great.
And Pete Bolzanis, DSA rep and principal at Beaverton Public School.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to circle back to Voice for Deaf and Hard of Hearing.
Sorry, everyone. Kathy Keaty, hi.
Hi. Great, thank you. Okay. And we're moving on to approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
You've only had that one additional letter as a change to the agenda.
Oh, sorry, that's right. We received that letter that was circulated.
Correct. So it's a letter from the Halton Catholic District School Board in regards to the bill linked to FASD. Was just an addition to the agenda this evening.
Right.
Sorry about that.
So can we get a motion to approve with the addition of the letter from the Halton Catholic District School Board? Okay, Tara, seconded by Kathy. All in favor? Okay. Moving on to the approval of the May 20th minutes. Has everybody had a chance to review those minutes? And does anybody have any questions or concerns with respect to those? Okay, can we get a motion to approve? Donna, second by Rowan. All in favor? Okay, minutes are approved. So we move on then to our staff report, starting with our administration report.
Thank you, and through you. So the administrative report this month has a focus in appreciation, as many of the updates for consultation with SEAC are embedded across the agenda including conversations this evening about de-streamed math and a presentation on that, as well as planning for the 21-22 school year. Well-being, mental health, and special education supports are once again infused into summer learning. So our students accessing summer learning will have access to professionals in the roles such as CERT and educational assistants as part of the team providing those learning opportunities. Our mental health team has put together a plan that weaves opportunity for individual continuity of service, community program access, as well as parent caregiver focused supports, including one that's running this evening out in the community. So to help families navigate the resources, a well-being health tab, mental health tab, has been placed on the front of the district school board website, and we'll put that in the chat box in a moment. And that links to resources such as the Parent Caregiver Series flyer, as well as a quite thick array of group activities that kids can access in terms of mental health supports with our community partners over the summer, and that was designed in partnership with the Durham Catholic District School Board as well. Next school year, we'll start with a focus on welcome and connection because we will be a system and a community in transition. So for example, we'll have many students and staff returning to in-person learning since a year ago March. And a model of virtual learning also moves into year 2 for students accessing through DDSB at home. In addition, we'll be welcoming new students, including a cohort new to their first school experiences in kindergarten. So plans for the fall include additional resources that stretch across the school year, such as increased mental health staff, and those focused on the first 8 weeks of the school year, such as increased support to some of our kindergarten programs. We have learned a lot this year, much of which we will continue to embed as we move through and out of the pandemic. We have a collective commitment to centering student identity, family voice, and we have learned to leverage technology in so many new ways, including opportunities for increased collaboration and engagement. And we have experienced truly a reshaping of professional learning. We are on a journey of change and continued steadfast commitment with our students at the core. So we thank our families, caregivers, staff across all roles in the system, and most importantly, our students for the privilege of being part of their supports. This is our administrative report for June 2021.
Thank you, Andrea. Does anybody have any questions for Andrea with respect to the administration report? Everybody? Okay. Then we will move on to the board report. Jonna?
What we our main thing is our last meeting, of course, is we passed at the standing committee our budget. This will be discussed and hopefully approved at our board meeting on Monday. And the biggest constraint to that is not knowing. Although we passed the budget, it's just not knowing what next year is going to look like, and we won't know until August. Staff have done the best in order to prepare for that and budget for that. Again, we support special education above the special education envelope to the tune of $6.7 million, I believe. This year, and we are drawing from reserves to support that as well. Of course, we had our update from the Parent Involvement Committee, and kudos to the Parent Involvement Committee, and now we have a SEAC rep on that committee as well. But they've done a lot, and actually of presentations and so forth, and our attendance has been really quite good. And so looking forward to seeing maybe some continue on those online so parents can have access. And just sort of a note from my part, maybe we could start looking at some just spec ed specific nights, maybe something virtually nights, because I think that it's more accessible to some parents as well. We also had our new draft of our Indigenous education policy and procedure that will be going to board. Those were sort of the main things that we have been working on as a board. We've got a couple of names also that will, for new schools that will be coming to board as well on Monday. So pretty busy, I think, agenda on the board meeting on Monday. And that's my report.
Thank you, Donna. Does anybody have any questions with regards to the board report? No? Okay. Then we will move right along then to the Inclusive Student Services Department report.
Good evening, everyone. I'd just like to reference the agenda for the department report, and I'll do some key highlights. It's always my pleasure to be part of highlighting excellence for our students. The Student Achievement Awards, so 3 students from each secondary school will be presented with a Student Recognition Award in recognition of their exceptional contributions to the school, community, and overcoming obstacles to achieve personal success. The LD, ADR, DDSB Ability Scholarship will be presented to Aiden Campbell from Brooklyn High School, a lovely young man that I got to meet personally the other night, and his family. And the City of Oshawa Exceptional Student Achievement Award will be presented at board to Emily Ling, where she is going to be going to Durham College to become an educational assistant. So I always love it when we can definitely highlight our students and their success. Some other key highlights in terms of the 21-22 planning, just to highlight that the parent survey will open again at the beginning of August so that parents can indicate preference for their child for in-person or virtual preference, and school staff will be adjusted as needed in August. The summer learning supports for students and families. In collaboration with the curriculum department, we're integrating daily well-being themes and summer learning programs. We prioritize psych assessments with a mental health focus, and our speech language pathologist will provide language literacy assessments for high priority students and supporting DDSB Reading Summer Camp in July. In addition, there will be supports to secondary school summer school, including CERTs, EAs, and supports embedded for ESL and ELL learners. Transition supports will continue with our Getting Ready for High School with a component of mental health as a focus. And students and parents, as Andrea stated, will have multiple opportunities to engage in access for their students and transitions back to school. And that is the board report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions with respect to the Inclusive Student Services Department report? I'd like to say congratulations to all of those award winners. Job well done. Okay, if we have no questions, then we will move right on then to number 9, to the presentation on the Destreaming of grade 9 math.
If I think Kathy had her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Kathy. Sorry, I missed you.
That's okay. I just was hoping to hear a little bit more about the prioritization of our students with mental health needs when it comes to psych assessment. Does that, if we can maybe speak further to that, I just wanted a little elaboration on impact that might have if there's a student whose growth plan isn't working, for example, and how that would work out, what the realities would be.
Sure. Michelle, do you want me to take that one? So through the summer funds for mental health, we know that well-being, mental health, and learning all intersect, right, in schools. And so what Dr. Graffy's worked through with his team is some of the staff that will be working through the summer on assessments that are really critical and working hand in hand with community assessments as well to develop a better understanding of the students' needs in order to be able to put a stronger plan in place for September. And so there's a cascading number there. What they won't be doing over the summer is some of the developmental assessments. Those will come back into the fall. So they're just trying to tier one of the things that we tried to balance within our plans for summer was we know that youth mental health needs are at a very high peak. And I've seen numbers in terms of 25 to 30% increases in need within that cohort. At the same time as the largest employer in Durham as well, we know that our mental health staff have been going straight through last summer. And we need to make sure that our students can be fully supported through the 21-22 school year as well. So we were taking kind of a staff well-being perspective as well as a student and mental health perspective, and trying to find that intersect spot. And so that's where the team looked at and said, of the different types of psych assessments, they really want to make sure that they're doing a thorough job. And so it would be cognitive, inclusive of mental health considerations in that regard for any students prioritized with their families and caregivers for this summer. So that was another part of the conversation, is with the families and caregivers to make sure that if we're engaging in assessment, that there's readiness and and that the student's well secure to do that, because we certainly don't want to add additional stresses to a student or have an assessment that's not valid because of the acute stress level. And so that's where our staff, continuity of care, assessment, and community partnerships for some group work as well is all part of the conversation. And really what's key in that is the adolescent voice as well as student family voice, in figuring out how to map that for our individual kids. So we didn't come up with an absolute finite criteria because we wanted to leave it so that we could look from a number of those angles for the individual students through the practitioners supporting those schools.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Rowan, go ahead.
Thanks. It's just, as I heard the question, it just sort of made me think to the button that we put on the main website. Is that serviced in the same manner during the summer holidays? Or is that sort of part and parcel with what you're talking about? Or do we have an emergency person to, perhaps we don't get to them as quickly, but we get to them?
So through you, Eva, the button is staffed Monday to Thursday during business hours by either psych or social work. They work in partnership to provide that service. We are quite clear in the communication that it's not an emergency hotline. And so anybody going on the screen where the button is located, there are alternate numbers for emergency services if the need is acute at that point. So the button is really for a connection and a soft handover to community partnerships within the summer. But we will also recognize, we do keep the button running 12 months a year currently. And we have seen a pretty sharp increase in the last 2-3 weeks of families and adolescents themselves seeking to connect with a mental health worker by using the button as well. So we've talked a little bit with it was part of our leadership conversation this morning with your liaison reps as well, just that it's interesting that we've seen that spike prior to the end of the school year. And so our mental health leadership team has taken that into consideration in talking to teams about staffing the button in the next 2 months when we know our schools are closed, anticipating that we'll see another increase of frequency.
Go ahead, Rowan.
Just a quick question, because with respect to the button, because that explains what I had, but in talking to the people who have been using it in the increased usage, does anyone talk about having difficulty finding the button, or do they go onto the website looking for this? How do they stumble across it? I'm just kind of curious how it's, I don't want to say marketed, but how it's presented to the people so that they know it's there.
Great question, and thank you. Through you, Eva, if that's okay. So it's a number of ways. If you Google Mental Health Durham, DDSB, it takes you pretty close to it. We will be broadcasting or syndicating it across all the school websites over the summer as well, just to try and remove some of those layers or barriers. And a lot of time too, it's our school staff sharing that access point as well to say this is available. So if you're making a decision, say over a weekend, but you just want to make a commitment to have somebody reach out to you, that we see somebody entering their information through the button as well. So I can go back to the team and get a bit more data. The teams always, because when I ask them around, so what do we know? What are the key drivers to people using the button versus the school-based referral? And are we seeing a difference? Part of the team, we want to push in terms of what is driving the connection, but really the team's focus is on making the connection and then getting to those layers. So sometimes it's not until the third or fourth conversation that they can get at what was the basis behind it, because they're serving the immediate need first and then developing the relationship and then going to those other pieces to understand the why. We can bring back more information to SEAC in the fall on usage and just access as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thanks. Are there any other questions before we move on to the presentation? Oh, okay. Then we move on to our presentation on the Destreamed grade 9 mathematics.
So through you, Ava, I'd like to introduce a wonderful team that is going to be doing the presentation today. We have Caitlin Twitchin with us, and she is the 7 to 12 math facilitator. We have Michelle Monk, who is a DSA rep, but also principal of Eastdale. And we also have Russell Davidson, a vice principal from Ajax, who's also a DSAA representative. I've been talking a lot today. So I'll just start with Destreaming of grade 9 math is part of provincial actions to address systemic racism, discrimination, and marginalization. There's 3 specific goals for Destreaming. 1, a cultural shift in schools and boards to identify and dismantle systemic discrimination and structural inequality. 2, increased educator capacity for effective culturally responsive instruction, assessment, and evaluation. And 3, increased student engagement, achievement, and well-being. So the team has really been working on the presentation to really help us understand how we are going about at the board in terms of implementation and the supports that we are putting in place for our staff and our students. So I will hand it over, I believe, to Ms. Monk.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm going to share my screen. I apologize, I've never presented on Zoom before. So hopefully as well, the video that's embedded into the slideshow works without me having to stop and reshare a separate tab. So fingers crossed everything works. And Russ is going to start things off, but I'm going to just share my screen first.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Michelle. So firstly, thank you for allowing us the opportunity to speak with you a little bit about the Destreaming process in grade 9 mathematics and some of the things that we are working on at the board and school level for our September rollout. Michelle and I are both extremely thankful to have Caitlin Twitchin on the call tonight, as well as her expertise as we were putting this together. Caitlin, I hope that we can fulfill all of the high expectations and all the high settings that you have for your teams and going forward. Caitlin has been an absolutely amazing resource for all of our admin teams and math teams as we prepare for this work. Now this slide is a really important slide for us, and I know we read over the human rights comment from the Durham District School Board, and we wanted to include the Indigenous rights comment as well, recognizing that Indigenous rights are distinct from the human rights, and there are certain things that are included in that. Now, the conversation around Destreaming really begins with ensuring that we remove the barriers to education and program essential supports into our classrooms. The Indigenous rights and human rights policy that we are working through at the DDSB are entry points into that examination of streaming as a policy that disadvantages many different populations. And so we wanted to ensure that as we begin this conversation tonight, that we're going to ground our work in the Indigenous rights and human rights before continuing with the rest of the material. So on slide 3 here, we have our quick overview of understanding the human rights context. There will be a brief history of Destreaming, meeting the learners where they are at, some of the work that's being done at the ministry and board levels to support, and then some of the classroom and programming supports that are available. We know we're going through this really, really quickly, but it's so important to give as much information as we can at this time. So in terms of the human rights context, it's important to remember that the D-Stream classroom is the only model that students have experienced up until this point. In terms of their perception of what a classroom looks like, they are not going to recognize differences from what they know coming from grade 8 into grade 9. I think it's also very important to highlight that Ontario is the only jurisdiction in Canada that begins streaming at the age of 13. There will still be some locally developed and essential level classes offered for students that are coming into secondary school with a defined workplace pathway. But the D-Stream classroom is going to amalgamate the academic and applied streams. And in terms of the human rights context, I love the line from Director Marsh that states, there's a very different feeling when we invite people into our classrooms as opposed to counseling them out. And I think that's such a critical part of the work that we're doing. Next slide, thank you. So the next slide is a slide from Jason Toe about the history of D-Streaming, and he will provide an incredible amount of information in a very short period of time. And so Michelle, let's just see if we can make this work.
Michelle, so we can't hear audio. If you want to unshare and then reshare, when you go to share, there's a button that you click at the bottom that says share sound, kind of like what you would have in Google.
Thank you, Caitlin. This is why you're getting the big bucks.
No problem. I apologize. I wasn't
All right,
sure.
I'll start it again. Let me know if this works.
You're good now. Thank you.
What is academic streaming, and what is its history in Ontario? Well, academic streaming is the practice of separating students into distinct schooling pathways based on their perceived ability. Streaming in Ontario can be traced back to the origins of schooling in the mid-19th century, when education, originally created solely for the colonial elites, was richer and more advanced than what the general working class later received. Academic streaming as we know it today has roots firmly in the education system of post-World War II Ontario. The Hope Commission of the early 1950s promoted ability grouping and the building of special education schools. In 1961, 3 educational streams were created and hundreds of vocational schools were built across Ontario to develop the workforce and accommodate the children of the baby boom, particularly those deemed with lesser ability. However, it became clear that these vocational schools were dead-end programs. In Toronto, these schools consisted almost entirely of students from racialized, working class, or single-parent families. With a graduation rate of only 20% and without adequate preparation for apprenticeship programs, enrollment declined significantly after only 10 years. By the early 1980s, a new secondary school curriculum was created with courses at 3 difficulty levels. With streams essentially still intact, along with hundreds of vocational schools still in existence across Ontario, students from marginalized backgrounds continued to be encouraged to attend lower-streamed programs. A government-commissioned report in 1988 recommended de-streaming to combat increasing dropout rates. Most school boards began de-streaming, though, in 1993. Although many teachers felt frustration and a lack of professional support during this de-stream period, a Toronto Board of Education study found that de-streaming led to moderately positive results for student attendance and achievement. However, when a new government was voted in, the education system was restreamed in 1999 into academic, applied, and essentials programming. While it was never intended for the structure to divide students along lines of ability and disability, class, and race, this was exactly the result.
Sorry, I just got to figure out how to exit full screen on this one. I'm just going to do this. Sorry. I don't know
All good.
how to get out of here. Oh, there we go. All right.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so the video that we just watched provides an amazing snapshot of streaming and some of the effects of it. So much information in that to consider. Every time I watch that little 2-minute video, there's something new that comes to me, something new that changes my perspective just a little bit. The piece that stands out for me right now when discussing the current system of streaming that we are in was the line right at the end there. It was never intended to divide students along the lines of ability and disability, class, and race. However, this is exactly the result. And I think that the next slide, the math pathway slide that's up now, sorry, Michelle. Thank you. Highlights that very well for us. If you can take a look at students entering into the academic stream of mathematics in grade 9, you can see that their pathway, and based on the proportionality, the arrows are weighted by thickness. Students who enter the grade 9 academic program have lots of pathway options as they move through high school. They can go to university, they can go mixed and then back up to university in grade 12. They tend to move around a lot, but for the most part, those students are consolidated for post-secondary school right upon entering grade 9. Whereas with the applied program, it doesn't seem to have quite the same benefit. There's a few students who will move to mixed, and then a few again who will move to university or college. There are some students who go to college, but there's a large proportion of those applied level students who never attend secondary school at all, or sorry, post-secondary school. And that's such an important thing for us to consider as we're looking at changing that. And the next slide, please, Michelle. So we know we need to meet learners where they are at. We know that the students who are coming into grade 9 in September are coming in with a variety of learning experiences and backgrounds and have faced challenges that no grade 9 cohort has ever faced before. We know that the last 16 months have brought unprecedented challenges, not only for the students, but for their caregivers and for staff, as we've all tried to navigate platforms we've never used before, pivoting to change the platform consistently throughout the year, and all of the overwhelming changes that have happened in our own personal lives. In preparation for Destreaming, we know that we need to meet the learners where they're coming from, and we need to support them in reaching their potential. Our teachers are all being well trained on the strategies that you see on the slide now. We also need to recognize that our teachers are going to come into this with a variety of strengths in a variety of areas that they need to grow for themselves. But as we begin this work, it's so important that we remember we have to have a student-centered approach to learning in order to ensure that all of our students reach their potential.
Thanks, Russ. I will continue from here, and I apologize. I noticed my camera and my voice are not in sync, so I will try not to let that distract me. So the ministry and the board have worked really hard to help support the staff in preparing for the implementation. Although the curriculum only just recently came out, there is actually a lot of work already done in supporting teachers and staff to be ready for September for the new curriculum and to have success for our students. So some of the things that they've been doing is, providing the funds to support the development of universal design in the curriculum and experiential learning opportunities, as well information sessions for families, and ensuring and continuing the wraparound supports and social supports that are available to our students and our community. In addition, the professional development of teachers to examine biases and focus on anti-racism and anti-oppression training, revising curriculum to be Indigenous or Afrocentric, and decentralizing dominant culture. So those ones are really huge, I believe, and I think that's an area where our staff have a lot of learning to do. Outside of this, our board equity department has been working tirelessly to educate and support staff in these areas so that we can ultimately remove those barriers for our students One of my favorite slides, I should have actually included the image on here, is one where you see the students standing behind the fence, where we've provided boxes for them, different level boxes, so they all can see over the fence. But really what we want to get to is where there's no fence at all. And that's what these pieces will do for our students, to remove that fence so that students from all cultures, backgrounds, and abilities are able to access the curriculum and experience success. There's also financial support for teachers for their additional qualifications, as well as additional educator classroom support, which is what Caitlin specializes in as well. So, as you may have heard in the news or seen, the curriculum was just recently finally released. So that was a relief and exciting at the same time for our teachers to finally get their eyes on what it is that they are going to be working with. A couple other pieces of information. The class size has been set at 27. Academic classes are typically 28, and applied have traditionally been 22. However, the evidence really does support the fact that class size does not directly correlate with success. And the statistics with the applied courses over the years supports that. We have, obviously, as Caitlin is one of our facilitators, we have coaches and facilitators to support staff throughout the board, and they've been working tirelessly. I joined actually just yesterday, one of the drop-in sessions that Caitlin had available. So lots is happening and lots is available to support the staff in preparation. Then we have our CERT, student success team, administration, EAs, all receiving information to help prepare them in ensuring that the right supports are in place for our students, because I think that there's a lot of worry because it's something that seems new. So the more prepared and the more aware everybody is of how we can start the year off and do those gap closing approaches, as Russ indicated, to support our students, especially this year. Of all the years for the new curriculum and the Destreaming, we have other gaps to fill as a result of COVID. But all students are coming in from the same place, from the same experience from the pandemic, but our staff are very aware across all programming that there's work that we need to do to get back into regular in-person school and move forward and have success. And then creative timetabling in secondary where possible. So every school has different staff, different facilities, different opportunities to be creative, to try to set students and staff up for success. So for example, at Eastdale, we have in the first semester ensured that the teachers who are teaching this course have the same prep period so that they can collaborate and work together to ensure some alignment in what they are doing and share their resources and successes. So again, the ministry is providing supports. So for example, the tools and strategies, tips, the teacher prompts, sample tasks. So they're really digging in deep to ensure that the teachers have what they need to apply directly into the classroom right at the start of things in the fall. And the board is putting together a writing team. Maybe Caitlin might speak to it later, but maybe they already have a group together to work over the summer to help specifically for our board develop resources and lessons to support that implementation. As well, the ministry's hosting a number of webinars for staff and the public really to access. Here, this slide just provides you the links that you can refer to in the future regarding some key changes, but I'm going to highlight some of those key changes in the next slide. And then they have developed an alignment chart for staff specifically to see how the students are moving through the intermediate grades. So key changes that I would like to highlight are, first, the explicit language on creating anti-racist and anti-discriminatory learning environments, and culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy in math. And again, I think I'd like to highlight that these are areas that the board actually has been working on for quite some time now. It is equity, strategic priority, and a lot of work has been going into this, but specifically digging into the math curriculum and what tools, what ways of teaching in the past have put up barriers for our students, and really digging into the actual teaching in mathematics to remove some of those barriers and ensure that we are being more culturally relevant and considerate of all students. Instructional approaches in math, so including universal design, the differentiated instruction, lots of high impact strategies. There's a variety of ways that we can engage students and ensure that there's that differentiation for all students to access the curriculum. And continuing focus on the education and career life planning. I mean, that career planning has always been something that is somewhat connected in all the curriculum in all subjects, but more of a focus because it's really important for engagement that students really see that purpose as to why they're doing what they're doing every day, and that will keep them engaged in the learning. And planning math programs for students with special education needs. So again, it's specifically in the curriculum now for teachers. It's not an extra separate, the IEP is not something that's outside of the curriculum. Within the curriculum, there's direct expectation around supporting students with special education needs, and then planning math as well for our ELLs. And then around assessment and evaluation, not just in our delivery of curriculum, but in that assessment and evaluation piece, it's really important that we are considering all aspects of what our students' needs are. And some of those things, even, for example, are planning assessment on days where students have to leave for prayer. That's just one small example, but also including language that different students understand, and ensuring that how we assess and how we evaluate really has that ability to reach every student. And then the last, which is one of my favorites too, applying the social emotional learning skills. Social emotional learning, from my perspective, is a foundation. It's like a house. If you don't have that foundation, the rest of the house is not going to stay together. And being explicit, like an explicit overall expectation. So teachers are having to teach those social emotional learning skills. It's directly outlined in the curriculum. It's not to be assessed or evaluated or reported on, but building those skills, and by explicitly teaching those skills is where we will ensure that the students are successful and accessing the curriculum. So I am so happy that that is a piece that's been included and prioritized within the curriculum as well. So everybody has a role and responsibility, so I'll go through these quick because I know we are way past our time limit. Students, obviously we want them to believe in themselves, to reflect, set goals, persevere through the difficult tasks, do their practice, ask their questions. We ask that parents are engaged, that they talk with a positive math attitude. I know you've all heard it before. We've all heard it that, you know, I'm not good at math. That math is not my thing. we all have the ability to do math, and it's just about changing our thinking and changing how we're approaching those problems. And so I hope that that's something that our teachers are, through that social emotional learning piece, will really work towards that belief that we all can be successful in math, and teaching how we go about doing that. And parents, we want them to be asking questions and be interested and collaborating with the school. Lastly, the teachers are going to use the assistive technology, engage in authentic tasks, have high expectations. There's a variety of things that classroom teachers can do. This is just a few of the highlights which we've already addressed throughout, and which the board and ministry are supporting to help those teachers fulfill within the classroom for September. So that concludes our presentation. But first, I would like to ask, what are some thoughts, considerations that you would like for us to share back to support the success of students you represent? The students that you represent. So, any thoughts or considerations after listening to the slide or thinking about the new Destreaming math? That is there anything for your organizations that you would like for us to bring back to the table as we are working to prepare for September?
Okay. Tara, I see your hand. Sorry, I don't have a full screen here. Okay, there we go.
That's okay. No, this is great. Just wanted to sort of clarify. So the Destreaming is really focused on students who are capable of achieving the applied or academic streams, like anyone that's in a locally developed program. This is sort of, we're not including them in that discussion, or are we?
So the way that it has been mapped out is, yes, they've amalgamated the applied and the academic stream into one stream. And I know I am saying the word stream because the goal is Destreaming, but yes, the locally developed still remains in order to support the students who are coming into, for example, some students that are coming into locally developed, a lot of them already, there's an intention that they're heading to the workplace. So that pathway directly leads them to that. There are ways still that they will be able to transition and move into the Destreamed grade 9 math.
Okay, so we are assuming that that is possible. So just from the conversation and from the arrows, it sort of looked like there was no option ever. So yeah, student that is maybe borderline with additional supports through longer, like what's the intent there?
Yes. Correct me if I'm wrong, Caitlin, feel free to step in. But I would say that it is similar to how it has been previously set up, where students, if through consultation with the teacher, the parent, and the administration, and looking at the students' abilities and how far they've come, what they've accomplished in the locally developed, then there would be a discussion as to how we move them into the grade 9 Destreamed math and then continue from there. So for some students, we've had them where they've come semester 1 and started in the locally developed class just to build up some skills and some confidence. And then in semester 2, move them into what previously was the applied programming. And so in this case, it would be the Destreamed class.
That's correct. And I think you were also speaking towards the graph that was shown about the current pathways. That's a reflection of student data for 5 previous years. And I believe that the dates are on there. The range escapes me at this moment. And what it was trying to reflect with a limited amount of arrows is also the proportionality of the few number of students that are in there. So in the university pathway, there was definitely more students that are in there. And although that is great and wonderful, it's a matter about reflecting, and each school was asked to reflect on who's being excluded out of that pathway, who is being pushed out of that pathway, who is not encouraged to consider that pathway. And so as part of some of the ministry's Destreaming goals, goal number 3 specifically talks about the idea of supports in transition planning. And one of that is transition planning starting at grade 7 that would make locally developed be a conversation, like Michelle said, that has to be done between home and school so that we don't see an influx of locally developed. What we don't want is for locally developed to become the new form of applied, so to speak, that what we would like is if students would have previously selected academic or applied, we would like them to enroll into the D-streamed grade 9 mathematics. However, again, with home and school consultation, students are capable of making that selection, but this year we have had that stance, but some of those supports from the ministry and information wasn't out right away. So we've gone back to make sure that that's proportionately correct to what we would expect. So we're not getting an influx of locally developed, but we're not preventing students from doing it if they so choose.
Okay. Thank you. Kathy, you had your hand up.
Thank you. I love hearing anything about universal design. I'm always interested to see how we prepare learning for universal design when we don't have our students yet, but any thinking about that is very welcome, and any talk about IEPs and being anti-oppressive in our lens. From that, I think that one thing that sometimes jumps out when I hear this conversation is an implicit bias that ranks our destinations when some of our students will end up in the community, some of our students will end up in the workplace, and many will take different steps to get to that workplace, whatever that workplace or community landing spot will be. And so I'm wondering, there wasn't a lot of mention, because if we say we're de-streaming because we are worried that not enough kids are going to university, that is really a colonial first, like a privileged space to be saying. And I think we have to be super careful. I just sat with a student today speaking to them, and they were unsuccessful in their OEP. And they have been successful through high school, and they went on to be an apprentice, and their math really held them back. And that is an apprenticeship pathway where their math held them back. And I think that valuing math and how that math is going to be real in the work, in your work, is huge. But I think that sometimes when we start saying, oh, you're going to go to work, so locally developed is okay, is not necessarily honoring all the pathways we should honor. So I'm wondering what's being done to not unintentionally push down apprenticeships, push down colleges, and push down kids who might be going into vocational things, because those require a lot of learning and skill that I don't have. And so I'm really nervous sometimes when I'm hearing our conversations about this.
Michelle, would you like me to?
Yes, please. Thanks.
Okay. So 100% that is an absolutely real concern that we want to be aware of as we consider all of this. De-streaming is not about saying students must go to university or they have to consider that as an option. This is about delaying their forced choice and recognizing the fact that the pathways that we currently have are not actually preparing our students for the futures that they want for themselves. So there have been studies out of Seneca and York that have looked at what they called the math project, which recognized that students who took college level math classes were not adequately prepared for their post-secondary experiences in college. And when we also look at the pathways here in Durham in that graphic, we recognize the fact that once students are in that applied or locally developed stream, there is very limited amount for them to move. And there's a variety of factors that lead to that. And yes, teacher bias and colonial structures is part of that. However, it's also like a mindset of teachers. So we are working on and bringing that awareness. What I can tell you is that we are preparing to have additional trainings in some of the specific front matter of the new curriculum, because it talks a lot about recognizing our biases, recognizing the shift that our mindsets have to have as educators, and towards also shifting the focus of recognizing that there is a beauty in mathematics and that it belongs in part of our everyday life. This is not about saying every student must go to university, but more so about giving them the option to if they want, and not making 13-year-olds have that decision right away. But I hear your concern, and thank you so much.
And sort of as a follow-up, what's that going to look like for a kid in the D-Stream math second semester when they're going to have to make those course selections after 3 wonderful weeks of the new course? And then all of a sudden the conversation shifts into streaming again.
Yeah, so we have those conversations regularly, and they happen throughout all sort of course selection pieces. At this time, the ministry has not created a plan for whether or not there will be a continued de-streaming into grade 10. However, it is our belief that if students are able to be successful in the grade 9 de-streaming, to continue to keep their pathway options open, it is our recommendation that they would enroll themselves into the grade 10 academic if there is no pathway changes at that time.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any other questions with respect to the D-Stream grade 9 math? Okay, is that somewhat covered? I don't see anybody else's hands up, so I'm going to throw in my concern here. It's somewhat covered my question about what are we going to be doing to ensure that we're fair in our streaming into grade 10, that we're not, those biases aren't going to creep in almost right away as soon as that grade 9 year is over, and then we end up back where we're excluding kids that should not be excluded once again.
100% that's a concern. And again, part of the ministry's plan is those 3 goals. And the first one is around all of us addressing our biases and having anti-racism and anti-oppressive training. And so that doesn't just mean math teachers. That means the school as a system. That's not just talking about grade 9 math teachers. We're talking about the entire department being part of this journey and the school as a whole. And through the work that I am currently doing in connecting with other facilitators within the curriculum achievement, within Indigenous, equity, inclusive student services, special ESL facilitators as well, and then innovation, we are making sure that this is a board-wide conversation, and that will continue. And again, in that front matter, it outlines that teachers need to be addressing their biases, both for instruction and for an assessment and evaluation, so that this becomes a whole global piece, and that those pieces are embedded into all of the webinars that we are currently hosting and all of the conversations that we have throughout our drop-in sessions.
Okay, thank you. And does anybody else have any questions? Thank you guys so much for that presentation. That was great information. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, then we will move on then to our open discussion period, with topic being the K-12 Educational Standards Committee initial recommendations. Discussion around that. I know Donna, were you part of that table? Yeah, I'm going to hand it over to you to start off this conversation.
I just want to say before we get into discussion, and I know that Andrea had sent out sort of going through the different sections, but yeah, I spent a couple of years with a group of people on this, just a couple of years. There were some breaks in between due to COVID and a change of government, whatever, but at the time. But I when you're reading this, and I know it's a long document and there's a lot of recommendations in there, I just would like to point out 2 definitions that are really key to understand while you're reading this document. One is inclusive education. And the reason why is because if you're of my age, at one point in time, or maybe some of you remember, at one point in time, inclusive education meant basically no small class placements. so, and we know that there are boards that don't have any range of services like we do offer at the Durham District School Board. So when they talk about inclusive education, it's that it's based on the principles of acceptance and inclusion of all students. And the key, all students. The students are themselves reflected in the curriculum, their physical surroundings, and the broader environment, and in which its diversity is honored and all individuals are respected. Okay, so it's from that perspective that we talk about inclusive education. And then the other thing that I might note, because we spent a lot of time on this, and it kind of touches when I think about Destreaming as well, is around ableism. And ableism refers to the discrimination towards people with disabilities, and it assumes that they are less worthy, or they're unable or less able to do particular tasks or functions. And it's really based on actions it results in actions that are from beliefs or attitudes. And it is a barrier, and it can affect, come out as, a negative stereotype, or a perceived perception on the capabilities of our students. And it basically devalues the potential of that person. And the thing is that ableism, especially with our students, can be, I see, as a cumulative. Because, and I just give you an example for a child with Down syndrome, right from day one, the child is born, depending on who your doctor is, they can give you a really, really sad story of what the child is capable of. And if you think that this hasn't changed, I think I've told this story before. The last time we had a in-person meeting a couple of years ago with the Durham Down Syndrome Association, I did talk to a young couple with an infant, and and so it was about what, 2.5 years ago or whatever. Now I can't remember, Tara, whenever that was, but still. Those parents told me how their basically doctor proceeded to tell them all the negative things and all what their child could not do. So right then and there, their parents are not necessarily able to basically are already nervous, etc., if they don't know about Down syndrome and so forth. And then they go into the school system. And depending on what the perceptions and as I said, they can be unconscious perceptions as well, and how they're dealt with it through the school. And it could be a battle right through in order to what they're able to. And so it's really key when you're looking at this document that at every point, and when we talk about racism and everything, I honestly think that we also have to talk about ableism, because there are those perceived perceptions of the perceived concepts about our kids that they aren't able to do things. And you might, and as a teacher, you might not be able to teach them in one class, but another technique, another method, you might be able to, the next year it just clicks. But they have to be given that opportunity. So each year as they go through the system, you have to be able to see where they are and their opportunity. And I'll give you an example is that I used to teach a martial gym class, and I had a young man in his 20s, and you had to know to skip. And his mom says, "Oh, don't bother." The teachers tried to teach him all through school. He couldn't do it. Well, I taught him how to skip. Now, it wasn't great, but he could skip. Okay, and that was in his 20s. We can all learn. So I just want to make sure that when you're reading this document, ableism is a really key. So when we talk about Destreaming, ableism is really key. That even when you're talking about in grade 7 and looking at where their paths are, don't restrict them. because things can change. Their environment can change. Something can click. So I just wanted to keep that in mind. Anyways, the real purpose of this, if you think of this document, it's out for public consultation. Everybody knows about AODA and that there's currently 5 standards. This will be the 6th standard that is hopefully that the government will take the input, actually the committee goes back and gets the input from the public. We make changes to our recommendations, and then it's up to the government to either incorporate all, some, or modify, or not at all, but into an education standard. So this input is really key, and looking forward to hearing it. There's, if anything, even if you just go through and put comments on each of the various barriers that we have referred to, that would be great. And then as your associations, I really think it's critical that every group go back and look at the standards and how it impacts, because it's not only, I was saying earlier, it's not only, it talks about transition into school, it talks about our transitioning to secondary, to post-secondary. It has about impact on standards to even at the teachers' college, our boards of education, facilities. It has impact across education sector altogether. And that's what I'm just going to say.
Great, thank you, Donna. I see Darlene has her hand up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to pick up a little bit on what Donna was saying, because as usual, she is just able to capture things so well, but I really think the shift, although the shift of, we have IEPs, they're necessary, they're absolutely about the individual needs, but the more we can turn the lens on ourselves as an education system and see, what the systemic barriers are, like that fence, getting rid of it, so that we really need to look at the systemic barriers. And as many people, including Tara, had touched on, we have this, in kind of all aspects of education, where we've really focused on the individual, but we haven't always been so good, I think, at looking at the larger picture of the environment. So I'm hopeful that this is moving in the right direction. So thank you.
Thank you, Darlene. Does anybody else have any input that they want to provide with what they've sort of looked at so far with regards to this K-12 plan? I don't see any hands. Okay. I know from my perspective, I'm very supportive of anything that is involves UDL and them looking at sort of how classrooms can be set up for the needs of all children as opposed to just a select few. Because I think from my experience and just talking to parents over the years, some of the accommodations that might be helpful for their particular child, well, maybe not necessary for everybody, would certainly be beneficial to everybody. And for our kids with special education needs, I think that the biggest barrier for them is standing out, right? A lot of them don't want to access their accommodations and things because they don't want to stand out. They don't want everybody to know that they have a need. And so whenever we can make something available to everybody, it's just huge for those kids, right? So I'm looking forward to providing some input. I've just started to sort of beginning to go through it. It's been a crazy couple of weeks, but I think it holds a lot of promise, and hopefully that'll get adopted in the end. Donna, is there a close date for this, for the input?
Yeah, unfortunately, right now it's September 2nd, and I can honestly tell you that I think that the Ontario Public School Board Association is going to request an extension. I'm not sure whether they're going to get it or not, but and there's always that possibility. But the thing is that it is a long document. There's a lot to go through, and I understand that. And I mean, if you want, you as a group can say that you would like an extension. But you know, if I'm looking at timelines and the government and where they are, and then elections, etc., the longer we delay the feedback, the more likely that this will not get into a standard. And whatever happens at the next election, there will be a delay. And as far as that's concerned, and even as it is, we're kind of tight, because if you think about, you know, they're already in election mode. We might as well say that. I mean, I can say that, you know, the government has started already in election mode. And so that is my concern. But yeah, September 2nd is the deadline date at this point in time.
You know, like, I know it'll be important for our individual associations to submit recommendations, but I don't know if anybody's interested in sort of trying to collaborate through the summer to put together a one voice from the Durham SEAC with respect to comments on this. Because obviously it's due before our first SEAC meeting would happen in the fall. So, I mean, if we did something like that, I guess it would be my recommendation, if everybody was okay with it, for us to sort of circulate it through the summer and have everybody agree on some sort of submission to put in ahead of the SEAC meeting in September, because we won't be meeting until then. And no thoughts on that? Go ahead, Tara.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea. Especially with everyone's different lenses and associations, we can provide a bunch of different perspectives to those, to all the recommendations, and at least give it a pretty fulsome view on that. The one thing I would sort of say for me, which is pinging off as probably one of the more important ones, is changing the attitudes and the behaviors and the biases. So it's in here, it's in the people where that inclusion really takes place. We can put policies and procedures until we want all out the wazoo, but unless you get the buy-in from the people implementing, and from the parents, and from the students, then and that a tool is a tool unless it's used properly, right? So that's the key part. Of that is, how do we change the attitudes and how do we change the behaviors and get that aha moment that might be lacking in someone that maybe makes that difference for a student, or all students, or the teacher, or the next person down the road. And that translates beyond school. You know, if you change the attitudes, the mindsets, it translates across into the community and into the greater world, which is never a bad thing. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I agree with you. Kathy, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I'd be happy to work on that. I've started, but haven't gotten very far with it. It is a lot to digest, but if people can give us some time to process slower over the summer, I'd be happy to work with that, because I totally think Tara's comment is bang on.
Yeah.
That, like, well, I feel like all I say is, can we turn on captioning? Can we have captioning, please? What about captioning, right? And that's with people who agree and believe in this. And so it's the reality, right? Where does the reality hit for things to change?
Yeah. Okay, so why don't we do this? Do you guys want to, you know, anybody who wants to sort of get together and sort of go over this sort of in a group when we can gather a little bit more in numbers? Why don't you send me an email and we'll put together something and try and set up some sort of a date or time to sort of give us time to review it, but then get together and chat about it. Yeah, Donna, go ahead.
I was almost thinking that because there's actually 9 sections, it's somehow chunking it, so that saying, okay, let's read think of it as a book club. Let's read these chapters and then provide feedback. Let's read these chapters, provide the feedback, and so forth, so that we chunk it and get it over, because otherwise I think it would be very difficult to try to read this whole thing and then have like one meeting over it. I think that might help from that perspective. And I just want to add on around attitudinal is that it's a really key as far as our leadership is concerned, right from the top down, that we model what we think, model what, inclusive education looks like. So, when we're providing training sessions, whatever, that captioning is turned on, like it should be turned on, as simple as that, and that it's not, and consider everybody, because I can honestly say that, and even listening on the members on the committee, there were some members on the committee that actually also had disabilities as well. And it was just interesting on how presentations there, here we are sitting in a building that was supposed to be, the Ministry of Seniors and Accessibility, and we had problems with accessibility, right? So it takes a conscious effort to do this. Anyways, chunking is my input to that, because I think otherwise it's a daunting task.
Okay. So why don't we do that? Why don't you guys pop me an email if you're interested in sort of doing a subcommittee, being on the subcommittee with that, and then and we will put it together. And I mean, if it's all of us, great. If it can't be all of us, that's okay too. Like, whatever anybody's free to do, because I know summers can be a bit hectic. So, but I think that would be sort of the best way to go. Okay. Does anybody else have anything they want to add with regards to this? Okay. Moving on then to the business arising from the minutes. I have my full notes here. The only thing was really the letter for the ministry, which we sent out. We did receive a response to, which we'll discuss under correspondence. And outside of that, there was nothing else. I confirm that we did not receive any association reports. I know there's probably has not been a lot of things planned for the different associations right now, given COVID-19, but hopefully come the fall, we'll be hearing more about activities happening. Correspondence, we received a few of them. We got one from the Halton District School Board with respect to the remote learning, which was really just, the supports for remote learning, which is just in support of our letter from February. So that was good to see. We received a response to our letter. That was sort of the second item from the ministry regarding our letter on the OAP situation. And, it was quite a lengthy letter. I don't know if everybody had a chance to read it. Pretty much telling us setting out the program and explaining what the program was going to be. But the biggest takeaway I got from it is that they've started looking for providers. They put out a tender March 30th of this year, and that their anticipation for the program to begin would be March 2022. So I'm going to first open it up to Sensor Reneb for her thoughts on that, because I think that probably that would be the best person to comment first.
So unfortunately, I didn't have time to review the whole letter, but you might have saw my facial reaction when you said 2022, right? Because that's quite some time that families are waiting without service. And the funding's already allotted for the service, so why aren't we spending it in the meantime? I'm very confused. I'm thoroughly confused. I would like some time to read through the letter further, but it made bode us well to write a response.
Yeah. I was thinking the same thing. I want you to have a chance to look at it.
Mhm.
Again, I was like, this is our last SEAC meeting and there's so much to talk about right now, obviously. Again, I don't know if this is something that we can, sort of review and respond to before September, because I think I hate the gap of waiting a couple months before we respond to something I think is so vitally important, right? For these kids and these families. So, why don't you take a look at it from the perspective of Autism Ontario, and then sort of get back, maybe send me an email on what your thoughts are, and we can circulate that and move forward from there.
Yes.
Okay. And then, sort of reach out to the committee members once we have those thoughts. Cause I found the letter was a lot on detail of what is to come and very little on what's happening.
Well, it's interesting that we got a response so quickly. It's interesting that this response is 3 pages long. Are you hiding something in all that verbiage, or are you over explaining because you feel guilty about what the final answer is, March 22nd? I'm confused by all of it.
Yeah, I read through a lot of it, and I found a lot of it wasn't really pertinent to what we actually asked. But Andrea, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I would fully agree with just the comment in terms of the scope. I think as a committee, you asked a couple really key questions around the use of the dollars and the service coordinators in terms of that. And the letter kind of goes in a few different directions, including the entry to school program being referenced, which is tracking on what was the projected timeline communicated when the initial pieces came out. So it's interesting that you came in with a very focused inquiry that was very family centered in terms of how do they access the dollars and who's going to be guiding or coaching or approving those decisions. And again, similarly, I didn't personally find where that answer was located, but I found a lot of other information about different buckets of the OAP.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought it was a lot of, let's look over here. Look over here and then look over here, and let's not pay attention to that key question. They don't know that we're a little more focused than that. If you could do that, Sensitive App, I would appreciate that, because I think this does bode a response.
I want our response to be as quick as their response to our letter. So look out for something within the next week.
Okay, that's perfect. I would like the same thing. So, yeah. And you have my office email, right? From different correspondence before?
I'm not sure. When I press Eva, something pops up.
Okay. It's just that if you send me something during the day and it pops up on my screen at work, I tend to go, oh, and I deal with it. So little faster. So if you have that, if not, I'll message it to you later. I'll send you an email.
You could pop it in the chat, or you could email me from that address.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do that. Okay. And there was, there was also a letter that came in from the Halton Catholic School Board that we've added to the agenda, which was basically their support, or also putting out their support for the Bill 172 with respect to fetal alcohol syndrome disorder. And I think we've touched on that before as well. And there was a reason, and it escapes me right now, that we've held off, because I think, yeah, go ahead, Donna.
I think I just got notification that it was passed.
Okay.
So I'm not mistaken. I'll have to just have to go through my legislative updates from OMSPA, but I just received it. It was a news release that actually happened today, I believe.
Oh.
Just let me take a quick peek. You can continue on and I'll see if I can find it, okay?
Okay. Andrea, I saw that you had your hand up for that. It's okay? Okay. And I also want to make note to the parents and caregiver workshops, the sort of flyers went out, and I actually saw it and circulated it myself from Facebook earlier in the week, so that's good. Probably good to circulate that to our association so that they can get that out to their parents as well. That might be, looking through it through there. Any questions or concerns with respect to that? Donna's looking for that news release. No? Okay. Well, Donna's looking for that. Then we'll circle back. But the community concerns. One of the things that's come up, and I don't know how many of you guys have been hearing it from your families or families of people your kids of in high school, but that a number of our kids that I've talked to, kids with special education needs, have been really struggling with this quadmester system. And I think the board's initial intent was to go back to a semestered, but the ministry has indicated that they have to proceed again into the 21-22 school year with the quadmester system. I don't know about the rest of the committee with the concerns, but from what I'm hearing and from all kinds of kids, not even kids who are struggling, have IEPs and have struggles with attention and maybe working memory or processing speeds, and different things, but that they're just finding this pace to be overwhelming, because while the number of hours within a classroom is, within a class is the same, the content they're getting all at one time is doubled. They're in a class for 2.5 hours. I don't know about any of you guys. I would struggle for 2.5 hours listening to somebody talk, listening to instruction. And that, for example, in a math unit, they might cover 3 units in that 2.5 hour period that they would normally cover a unit a day. One student even told me, and not mine, that they actually had lessons and a quiz on those lessons in the same class, just to kind of meet the timelines for getting all the curriculum in. So I have concerns. If they're moving forward on this. A lot of kids, I've heard feedback that kids who have never handed things in late or handing things in late, that by the end of the school day, they're just wiped from that sort of focus on one thing for such a long period of time, and that lack of movement in between and stuff. Those are my concerns. I feel that these kids, I think it's hard for IEPs to be implemented and extra time to be allowed for test writing, et cetera, under these kind of circumstances, and the fact that they have half the evenings and weekends to do that homework in. So those are some of my concerns. I see that Kathy has her hand up wanting to comment on that as well. I don't know what your guys' thoughts are. Go ahead, Kathy.
I'm just making sure I'm unmuted because I don't like when, I don't know how many times we're all hearing you're muted. Sorry. I actually hear a little bit of the opposite as well, though. And quadmesters aren't new. They have been implemented in some jurisdictions for different reasons, and some students navigating fewer courses find benefit because they're managing 2 sets of expectations rather than 4. And so if there is an issue with trying to transition, there's fewer transitions. So I'm hearing sort of like every structure that we artificially have created, like the semester is not a gold standard. It is something artificial when we divide up learning into different courses. that we are forced to do. So I know other jurisdictions aren't going quadmester, but they are still having to do no more than 2 periods a day. So we don't have a lot of flexibility. Some school boards this year did octomester, where they were doing 1 course a day for 4.5 weeks. So, and again, some people were singing its praises and other people were saying it's worse for some students. So it'll be better for some and not for others, is what I'm hearing from students who've been in the quadmester and the board. But I guess my question is more, they've already made this decision going forward. Is it for this full year? Is there any talk that there might be a pivot mid-year when we're tied to octomester at the moment, I guess is my, or sorry, to quadmesters in the board right now.
All right. Andrea, go ahead to respond. Yeah.
So thank you so much for that question. And you are absolutely right. So the ministry has mandated a maximum of 2 courses. So it's either quads or the week on, week off, because we can't pierce cohorts either. And so right now, what we've signaled is preparing the timetable based on quads, hoping to move into a second semester and to make the switch for the second half of the school year. There is strong advocacy that if the data shifts over the next few weeks, when the August memo comes out from the ministry directing more about secondary, because that was one of the cues too, was to boards, start planning, but we're really going to give the full guidelines in August for secondary specific and expect to be making some changes. There is some strong advocacy to allow boards to move back to a semester model, because I would agree with you, there's feedback on both sides of how that has impacted or being within a student's experience. But the general weighting is more in favor of return to semester. So we're on a wait and see. All of our secondary schools are on a bit of a wait and see in terms of staffing and timetabling, so we can get a bit of the foundations in. But what we've signaled is we're setting the system up for quadmesters, but we'll continue to advocate that if we don't go semesters for the fall, to still make sure that there's a communication point and a consideration point for the second half of the school year from the ministry is what we're asking for.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Since Renapa, see your hand up.
I have more of a comment than a question. I'm thinking about it from my personal perspective. I'm the mother of twins. One of my twins would have loved the quadmester. She loves to get things done and out of the way, and it would have been perfect for her. And my other child would have affected his success in school. He has less of an attention span. That 2.5-hour class, he would have lost 2 hours of school, every class. He can do 45 minutes really, really well with full effort, full attention, but after a while, it wouldn't have worked for him. He was able to manage high school without an IEP because we weren't doing quads for one. But in this quad system, he would have had to have an IEP enacted in school and in full use to be successful. As well as we used movement for him. So fresh in the morning, he can have an academic subject, but then for his one that held the most literacy, he had to have it prefaced by gym or fitness. So because it was a semester school, he took gym one semester and fitness another semester. But working in a quad system, he may lose one of his academic courses each round because of not having enough access to what he needs for his success. So it's not actually a question, it's more of a comment based on my personal experience, because I understand what the ramifications are. And if I had to choose by one on, one off or a quad system, I would still choose the quad, knowing that my child is functioning for about 1/3 of the day.
Yeah. That's kind of been my experience talking to people with kids with attention issues in particular. That's a lot for them. Does anybody else have any comments? I mean, I'm glad to hear that there's some consideration of movement in that it's not sort of a written in stone situation. Donna, go ahead.
And again, honestly, we don't know what the government will do when they release what the fall is supposed to look like. They've done it in the past where they've come out and said this is the way it's going to be, and fairly, with not a lot of direction. So I know that if you've seen in the newspaper, there's been a few boards that have changed their direction. They won't be doing the quad system, and one is one of the larger boards like Toronto, right? So again, it really is the feedback that is going to be solicited in August, and also what the Ministry of Education decides to do, what September looks like. And we really, it's been unpredictable on what has been coming out. So appreciate the comments though, because I will definitely tack that into my for discussions when we start talking about it, because I have a funny feeling we'll be having a meeting before what we normally do in order to talk about the startup of school.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Donna. I appreciate that.
And then I was just going to say, I stand corrected. It's been passed to committee and has been sitting in committee as far as the FSA. The item, what came out today was a new 4-year strategy from the Ministry of Education on training and retaining more French teachers. It'll to address the shortage of French teachers. That's what came out today, as far as that's concerned. And it was interesting because it does list basically how it was put together, and what the input was, and it does say that it talks about the French Ontario School Boards Association and so forth, but that at the very end it basically talks about that it was put together with the FSL workforce pilot project that OPSPO was instrumental in doing it. So basically putting together, it was a collaborative effort, but I thought it was interesting as well. But that just came out today.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Tara, you had an issue you wanted to bring up?
Unless, and there's other comments on the first topic. Oh, we can.
Does anybody else want to put on any comments with respect to the quad mastering? No? Okay, go ahead, Tara.
Okay. Wanted to bring up there was an email, was it last week? I can't even remember now. My days are just colliding into each other. I apologize. An email came out from DDSB talking about secondary and change of bell times for the upcoming year. And sort of talking about what that was doing. I was slightly confused by the email, I'm not gonna lie. So I reached out and I said, what's going on? I was a little confused. So I got some of that. And then we received another email directly from Director Marsh that had said that the bell times was really a change to accommodate bus schedules. But there was another layer in the original email to talk about inclusion, and sort of kind of going back to the whole conversation about inclusion and inclusive services. I really wanted to get a better understanding as to what's the true intention of the switch in the bell times, given that a lot of the families, especially those in small class placements, we pretty much recognize a lot of those children have high needs, so they generally have other appointments after school or other things that they already have to do, having to sort of rearrange their lives for that time. What's the advantage and what's the reasoning behind that this is a necessary thing to do? And secondary question is this sort of like a permanent switch, like we're switching completely to 10 o'clock? a.m., 10 a.m. for start and 4 p.m.? I just want to kind of understand what the intent was there. Thanks.
Go ahead, Andrea.
Thank you, Eva, through you. So Tara, thanks for the question. So I think the answer is a yes and both of those things. So as we entered into, and Michelle will jump on if I miss anything from our conversations and planning, because we really rolled this around as a senior team and as an ISS team as well. So while we were coming into the 2021 school year, we knew that we needed to make some adjustments, and we knew that students in our special education classes, self-contained, needed to be in that full day in-person learning when our schools were open. And so we maintained on that schedule, and then the rest of the school switched to that modified schedule, right, where the kids were coming in and they were going home for lunch and then going online for their other day course and then flipping into the study period. So but what that created, so it created stability for the kids that were accessing through special education class from a routine perspective. But what came out over the school year was really, I don't think a de-evolution is a proper word, but that's kind of what's going through my head, is a pullback from inclusive schools. As we had our special education classes on one bell time and our mainstream regular class placement students on another bell time. And so then, and it worked, the magnitude of the impact was not as great in 2021 as it would have been next year. Because what we heard from a lot of families was a hesitation around integration because of COVID risk and breaching of cohorts. And so what we had heard from a lot of families was, we really want our child to attend school, but please only keep them with their class. So you can do integration online, you can Zoom and zip into another class virtually, but we actually don't want them physically changing spaces out of concern for the virus. And so when we looked at running 2 bell times and the fact that kids weren't accessing on the same frequency that in person and weren't out on work ed to the same extent either because of the impacts of COVID, we were monitoring. And when we talked about the education standards, I think what naturally started to happen too is we started hearing words that Michelle, Kyla, and I were, our spidey senses go up, where this part of my school and this part of my school instead of this is my school for the kids, and staff felt it as well, right? I'm part of the special education staff, or I'm not part of the special education staff. And as 3 leaders of inclusive programming, we want all staff to identify as special education staff and providing enriched and inclusive environments. And so as we were coming into planning for next school year, and I apologize, the years, so I know I'm going into the 21-22 school year, and I do know it's June, and we're getting there. We knew what was really important was whatever the bell time schedule was for schools, we needed all students on the same bell time because we needed an inclusive community within the building. We need to provide meaningful and individualized integration opportunities, and we know that those work education components are going to start coming back as well. So that was we said, the class access is important. We've heard that from families. Meaningful and individualized integration absolutely is a key foundation for kids, and that being individualized. And, through the review, we made those changes to staff so that we would do that through the day and have kids out based on their individual pathways. At the same time, there's a provincial busing shortage, both in terms of vehicles and drivers. We know that with SEA equipment, as our kids build, as some of the technologies, such as those that are mechanically dependent on wheelchairs and technology, the chairs are getting heavier and a bit bigger as the tech becomes infused in them. So for some of our accessible busing, we actually see a decrease in the number of students that actually can be boarded because of the safety components in that way, right? So we're taking a look at that. And then with the COVID protocols, because again, as Donna said, we're not quite sure what the expectations are going to be for the fall, but we know we can't jump back to 72 primary kids on a bus. And in grade 9, we can't jump back to 48 secondary students loaded on one of those larger passenger buses. So in order to keep the cohorts in place for elementary and secondary in terms of transportation, the two systems can't bus at the same time. So we can't bus elementary and secondary at the same time and actually get everybody where they need to be when they need to be there. And so in order to throw the two systems kind of off a little bit, elementary is at 1 bell time and the secondary maintained to the 10 to 4. Associate Director Wright did speak, Don, I believe it was at board, if I time my meetings correctly, and said that it is a 1-year solution, and that if we are still under COVID protocols, there needs to be a different answer for the 22-23 school year, and that the 10 to 4 is a 1-year only stopgap, and that if we're either going to return to differentiated bell times and we're going to be able to bus and put more kids on buses and not run the buses so often, or we need a different solution that they've now had time to get there. Because we know it's not ideal. We've heard from families around co-curriculars, around part-time jobs, and certainly around therapy and access points and care. And we've heard that around the after school portion. We've heard that about that morning piece for families too, which is why it was really, really important. And Director Marsh was really super clear in terms of just being cognizant of how magnitudinal that changes for families in making sure that we gave 3 months notice to make sure that we had the decision made in order to communicate while staff are in buildings, can have conversations, and to give families a good runtime. Do we see it as ideal? No. Are there a few families that are going, that's great, I can get my kid to sleep in and then go? But are there families where it is a fairly tremendous concern? It is, but in order to get inclusive schools, we need alignment. We need the student population to have a bell time. And in order to do COVID busing, not COVID busing, but busing during COVID protocols, we need elementary and secondary to be busing at different times. And to have a system our size, it needed to be that different in order to do that. So not ideal. But Tara, back to your framing of, was it for the inclusive schools or was it for the busing? It's a yes and both. In order to do both, it was the only way to do that. Michelle, I don't know if I've missed something from our conversation that you want to add in.
Just to add to that, one of the huge challenges from a secondary perspective was definitely doing meaningful integration. When you're on two time schedules, what some of the language that we started to hear was, well, that's two schools inside of one. That's two separate timetables and two separate staffing. And our largest concern was a move away or a thought process that wasn't moving us more into an inclusive framework. By having students on the same time frame, it allows for definitely more meaningful inclusion. I sat with the team yesterday from Maxwell, who was already planning individually inclusion for their students from students in their PLP program. And what I love to see, it was individually planned. It was not the group of students from PLP would be going to this class. It was some were going to English, some were going to art, some were going to phys ed, because it does allow, when the bell times are aligned, for that true meaningful inclusion to happen. And it also embeds within the culture of the school that this is what we are about. We are an inclusive school where we are supporting all students across the curriculum and all students with their pathway. So I just wanted to add that piece in terms of an organizational, in terms of the development of the culture within the school. We felt it was really important in terms of that alignment.
Okay, great. Thanks. So just a couple comments on that. You're talking about, so that was an example of one school. Is this something that the expectation is this is across the school? Like, we don't want to be an inclusive school. We want to be an inclusive school board. That's so right. Are all schools doing this? Because if they are, then there's some parents that are not being included in that conversation. So I just want to just sort of frame that back to sort of say the expectation is that if we want to do that and say that we're going to be inclusive, then we've got to follow through on that. And all schools have to do that with the mindset that the initiative's being taken. Because we're doing that and we want to include that, we need the schools to step up and reach out and say, this is why we want to do this. This is what we're going to get from this. And this is how our kids will benefit. Recognizing that everyone's got different skills and abilities and families have different levels of comfort of whether or not they want to integrate and do things. The other piece on that is extracurricular after school, same concept. I'm assuming that part of that alignment would then allows for after school programs. Kids can include them and be in those programs. Again, back to those kids will need support. Those kids, I keep saying that our kids will need support in order to be included. Are those supports in place? And or is that a conversation with each individual school again? And then how are we in making sure that that funnels through so that that follow through is there? If the families really do want to have that level of inclusion, and some families might not, right? So it's got to be an individual conversation to say, what do we do to make it best for the student's school career? And that sort of stuff. So some of the conversations that I've been having with some families, that it just seems to be, you're changing it and we've got to figure it out. And that's not necessarily a fair conversation, but it's a reaction, obviously. But we want to make sure that the reasons are there. And then if those conversations, those follow-up conversations with the individual parents that are especially being affected and potentially adversely, that we're reaching out to them. So are those conversations being had? I guess is sort of the next question there.
So through you, Ava, I'll answer part of that question and then I'll hand it over to Andrea for a little bit. I can tell you that it has been the goal of Kyla and myself to meet with individual secondary schools and school teams to really help them in terms of understanding what true meaningful integration means and how that plays out for the students and the student pathway. So the example that I gave you from Maxwell is just the one example. Both myself and Kyla met with the school team because we bring different levels of expertise. Obviously, Kyla from her expertise in terms of special education and being around in the role for so long, mine from just being brand new, coming into the role from a secondary role. And I have to say the level of thought and process that the team from Maxwell put in is a true example that we are putting forth and looking at how we can make sure that we're providing the support and the layers to our other secondary schools and colleagues as well. So definitely, I appreciate the question, and we are working on it and working our way through with the understanding that our teams are at different levels of understanding that process. So myself, Kyla, and Andrea are working on some tips and suggestions of how to go about timetabling, how to actually improve the experience for our students, how to put the supports in place, how to utilize the resources, etc. And we are hoping once we are able to get back to in-person, going to the schools and taking a look at these things in actions and planning forward. So planning forward in terms of some of the things I'm hearing our secondary schools are doing is co-teaching some classes, looking at putting some adaptive classes into place, looking at examples and sharing experiences, etc. But I can say that when the timetables are aligned, it is much easier for there to be more opportunities to be able to have access to the classes that are available for the student's skill set and to also expand their skill set as well. And it was one of the challenges that was really put into place with the differentiated bell times. And I know that there was many layers to that. We had parents did not want integration to occur, a variety of different things, but as we hopefully move forward, we wanted to make sure that that opportunity was there and that integration was going to be meaningful and that we'd have staffing to be able to do that and to schedule appropriately. I'll hand it to you, Andrea. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say.
No, I think you beautifully covered it.
Okay, great. Donna, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say it was at the last standing committee that we were talking about it, but I'm sure it will come up again at board on Monday. And that because for all the things that was mentioned here by Andrea, by Tara, I have received letters from my constituents around issues around the change in bell times for a variety of reasons, not only from parents with special needs. So, but anyways, I'm sure that question will come up and it will get answered again. But very much said, it was very much said that is a 1 year item, unless something changes that we still under COVID protocol. Hopefully not in the next year, but yeah, understand that it is creating a huge issue, the time schedule. Although some of our students have quite liked the 10 o'clock start. So, and I was just going to say, Michelle, don't sell yourself short in that, even though you might be new, that you have a lot of great ideas and have experienced them. So don't sell yourself short.
Great, thank you so much for that input. Does anybody else have any community concerns they want to bring up right now before we? Anyone? Okay, great. Then we'll move on to our celebrations and successes. I mean, I would say first and foremost, we've all made it through this year. So congratulations to everybody on that. Go ahead, Andrea.
Mine is just a thank you to all of the members of SEAC, as well as our administrator liaison members as well. It is such a privilege to sit in a space that is so focused on inclusion and supporting excellence for kids. I just feel really privileged to be around the table, and I know it's a privilege of the portfolio to be part of SEAC. So thank you so much. I think we are getting deeper in the conversation, trying to get deeper in where SEAC is consultative to things within development to be able to help inform the shaping. And so I'll keep working on that next year, as well as the amazing leaders that I work daily with. But just thank you. You are a tremendous group of advocates, and I learn a lot by walking alongside you in our shared passion. So thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything? Go ahead, Donna.
I can honestly say that, you know, as far as we actually got the K-12 standard out for public consultation, that's not to do with here, but it was a great push considering it was done when it was done, and the fact that it got out. It's just so sad that it still took a long time to get out. But I want to reiterate that, as I said, I mentioned before, I sat on SEAC table for a long time, and this year has been quite the amount of input and the feedback and just the dedication of this group has been really quite something for me to see and be part of. So thank you again for your dedication and being on part of SEAC.
Does anybody else have anything? Thank you so much, Donna. Does anybody else have anything they want to share? Well, I'm going to reiterate what both Andrea and Donna said. I've actually been really impressed at our SEAC this year and how much input we've put in and some things that we've managed to accomplish this year. And I certainly haven't seen a lot of circulation going on from many of the other SEACs around the province. So I'm really proud of our group because we're obviously not letting a pandemic stand in our way of advocacy, which is huge. And I feel like we're moving towards recognition of our existence within the community and that more people are hearing about us. And I think that's big. I think that's really important for families because it helps them know where to reach out to. So I want to thank everybody for a great year and the willingness to even continue through the summer with respond to, you know, put input into the K-12. So that's great. So I appreciate that, everybody. Our next SEAC meeting is September 16th, 2021. And
we have one more comment. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Did I miss? Who did I miss?
It's okay. It's me.
Sorry, Santa. I didn't see your hand there.
It's okay. This is Indigenous Month, and we did have, an event that brought us reeling back to our reality. So in honor of that, I would like to share a quote from the Apache. Looking behind, I am filled with gratitude. Looking forward, I am filled with vision. Looking upwards, I am filled with strength. And looking within, I discover peace.
Thank you. That is awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Okay, our next SEAC meeting is September 16th, 2021. And I'm not sure if it'll be online or in person. I guess we'll find out closer to then, see what happens through the summer. Would anybody like to make a motion to adjourn? Tara, second? Sensor Renab, all in favor? Have a wonderful summer, everybody. Thank you so much for your dedication.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers.
Hi, everyone.